The nausea hit me somewhere between exit 42 and the middle of nowhere, and I barely got the door open before my body decided it was done, pretending everything was fine. I crouched on the gravel shoulder of I-70, one hand braced against the car door, the other pressing into my knee, and I threw up everything I'd eaten that morning, which wasn't much, because mornings had become their own kind of war zone ever since the 2 pink lines showed up on that test 3 weeks ago. The semis blew past at 70 miles an hour, and every one of them rocked the car and sent hot exhaust over my face, and I just stayed there, head down, eyes watering, waiting for my body to decide it was finished humiliating me. "Can you hurry up?" my husband said from the driver's seat. He didn't get out. He didn't come around to hold my hair or put his hand on my back. He just sat there with the engine running and said those 4 words to me, and I remember thinking, even in that moment, even with my stomach still heaving, I'm going to remember this forever. We were driving back from his parents' place in Columbus. A 3-hour trip we made every few months because my mother-in-law believed that if she didn't see her son at least 4 times a year, she was being neglected. Her word, neglected. As if she were a houseplant, I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and straightened up slowly. The morning air was cold and smelled like diesel and wet grass. I stood for a second with my eyes closed, breathing. I said, "Are you done?" my husband said. I looked at him through the open car door. He was staring at his phone. I got back in the car. We'd been married 4 years. I was 31. He was 34. We had a house in Indianapolis, a joint checking account, 2 cars, and now, apparently, a baby coming in approximately 7 months, which my husband had responded to with the kind of silence that fills a room like smoke. Not angry, just absent, like the news had reached him and then slid right off. His mother, on the other hand, had opinions. She'd pulled me aside that weekend, Saturday afternoon, while my husband was in the garage with his father, and she'd sat across from me at her kitchen table with her hands folded and said, very calmly, "I hope you're not planning to stop working." I told her I hadn't made any decisions yet. She said, "Because my son has a life, he has a career, he has plans. And I just want to make sure you understand that a baby is a shared responsibility." I remember nodding. I remember the way her reading glasses were pushed up on top of her head like a headband, and how she'd made a pot of coffee that morning and not offered me any, even though she knew I was struggling with smells. She'd made it anyway, right there in the kitchen where I was sitting, and the whole room had filled with that dark roasted smell, and I'd had to breathe through my mouth for 20 minutes. Small things. The kind of small things you file away and don't talk about. That was Saturday. Sunday morning I woke up, and both of them were already in the kitchen talking in low voices that stopped the moment I walked in. My husband handed me a glass of water and didn't meet my eyes. His mother smiled the specific smile she used when she wanted me to know I was being tolerated. We left after lunch. I threw up at exit 42, and then we kept driving. I don't know exactly when I fell asleep. Somewhere around Dayton, I think. I leaned my head against the cold window and closed my eyes, and the hum of the highway pulled me under. I woke up when the car stopped, not at our house. I sat up and looked around, and I was at a gas station, one of those big highway ones with the bright fluorescent lights and the smell of hot dogs that have been rotating since sometime last Tuesday. My husband was standing outside the car talking on his phone. His back was to me. I got out. My legs were stiff, and my mouth tasted terrible. I dug through my bag for a stick of gum, and that's when I realized I didn't have my bag. I'd left it in the back seat. I turned around to get it and found my mother-in-law standing behind me, which was strange because she lived in Columbus. She was holding my bag. "We need to talk," she said. I looked from her to my husband. He was still on his phone, still facing away. I looked back at her. "What is she doing here?" I said. "Did you drive separately? Why is she?" "We've been talking," my mother-in-law said, "and we think it's best if you find your own way home from here." I didn't understand the sentence at first. I turned it over in my head like it was in a foreign language. "What? You've been making my son miserable for 2 years," she said. "The pregnancy was not planned, it was not discussed, and we feel—" "We feel?" She set my bag down on the pavement, not handed it to me, set it down, like luggage at a hotel she was checking out of. "That this is a natural stopping point," she finished. I looked at my husband. He had turned around now. He was watching us. His phone was in his hand, and his face was doing something I'd never quite seen it do before, Something carefully blank, like a wall that's been freshly painted over, no emotion, no apology, just this deliberate absence of anything. "You're not serious," I said. "There's a diner about a mile up the road," my mother-in-law said. "You can call someone from there." "You have my phone," I said, because he did. I'd handed it to him to navigate when I fell asleep and he'd never given it back. She looked at my husband. He took my phone from his pocket and set it on top of my bag on the pavement. Then he got in the car. She got in the car. They drove away. I stood there for what felt like a long time. The gas station lights buzzed. A truck pulled in on the other side of the pumps, and a man got out and went inside without looking at me. The wind picked up and pushed a paper cup across the parking lot, and I watched it go until it disappeared under a parked SUV. I picked up my bag. I picked up my phone. My phone was at 4%. I walked inside the gas station and asked the woman at the counter if I could plug my phone in somewhere. She looked at me for a second, really looked, the way people look when they're deciding whether you're trouble or just having a bad day, and then she pointed to an outlet behind the lottery ticket display. I sat on the floor next to the lottery tickets, and I plugged in my phone and I called my sister. She answered on the second ring. I told her where I was. She asked me to say it again because she thought she'd heard me wrong. I said it again. She said, "Don't move. I'm coming." My sister lived 40 minutes away in Terre Haute. She showed up in an hour because she hit traffic, and also because she stopped and got me a ginger ale and a sleeve of saltines, which she knew I'd been living on for 3 weeks. She handed them to me through the window before she even got out of the car. She hugged me in the gas station parking lot for a long time and didn't say anything, which was exactly right, because anything she could have said would have been too small for the moment. On the drive back to her place, she kept one hand on the wheel and one on my knee, and I stared out the window at the flat Indiana dark and thought about the blank look on my husband's face. Not angry, not guilty, just absent, like I was already someone he used to know. My sister had a guest room with a quilt that smelled like lavender and a window that looked out onto her backyard where she'd planted tomatoes last summer and not yet pulled up the dead stalks. I lay in that bed for 3 days and did mostly nothing. I ate saltines. I answered emails from work. I threw up in the mornings and felt marginally better by noon. I let my sister bring me soup. I didn't call my husband. He didn't call me. On the 4th day, my brother called, not to check on me, to tell me that my husband had called him, looking for me, and that my husband was very worried and wanted to know if I was okay. My brother said this with the kind of studied neutrality that told me exactly whose side he was on, which was no one's side, which is its own kind of betrayal. I said, "Tell him I'm fine." My brother said, "He sounds pretty upset, you know. He says there was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. He left me at a gas station," I said, "with no car, in October." "Well," my brother said, and let the word just hang there like he was waiting for me to do something with it. I said goodbye and hung up. On the 6th day, I got a lawyer. Not because I'd planned to, not because I'd been lying in bed strategizing. I got a lawyer because my sister said, "You should probably call someone." And she was right, and when I called the number she gave me, the attorney on the other end of the line had a calm, matter-of-fact voice that made me feel like I was finally standing on solid ground after a week of sinking. Her name was Catherine. She'd been doing family law for 17 years. She asked me questions for 45 minutes, and I answered them, and by the end of the call I understood several things I hadn't understood before. The first was that the house we'd bought together was in my name alone. My husband had had a tax issue the year we bought it, something I'd known about vaguely but never looked into carefully, and because of that issue, the mortgage and the deed were entirely in my name. I had signed every document, he had signed none. The second was that our joint account had been opened with my pre-marital savings as the initial deposit, $7,000. Which I had transferred in when we got married because I'd read some article about the importance of financial unity in marriage, and I had been 27 years old and very sincere. The third was that under Indiana law, I had options, good ones. Catherine said, "What I need you to do right now is not make any large financial moves, not contact him directly, and not let him back into that house without documentation." I said, "He doesn't have a key to the house right now." There was a pause. "Why not?" she said. "Because I keep my house key on a separate ring from my car keys," I said. "My car is still in our driveway. He drove us there in his car." A beat. I have my house key in my jacket pocket, I always do. Another pause, shorter. Good, Catherine said. I drove back to Indianapolis on a Thursday morning in my sister's car. She offered to come with me, and I told her I needed to do this part by myself. I pulled into our street at 10:15 in the morning. His car wasn't in the driveway. I went inside, walked through each room, and stood in our kitchen for a few minutes, looking at the coffee maker and the dish rack and the calendar on the wall that still had dentist appointments and dinner plans written on it in my handwriting. Then I changed the locks. My neighbor across the street, a retired woman named Dot, who had lived in her house for 32 years and knew everything about everyone on our block, watched me from her porch and gave me a nod when I looked up. I nodded back. No explanation needed. Some things translate without words. I moved his clothes into the garage, not through, moved, folded, in boxes, with his shoes paired up neatly beside them. I'm not sure why I was so careful about it. Maybe because I was raised that way. Maybe because I didn't want to be the kind of person who throws. He showed up that evening at 7:30. I heard the car in the driveway. I heard him try his key. I heard the silence when it didn't work. Then the doorbell. I went to the door. I didn't open it. I stood in the entryway with my hand on the wall and I waited. I know you're in there, he said through the door. I said nothing. Look, he said. I know this looks bad, but we need to talk. My mum, she's not well, she says things sometimes. She gets intense about, can you just open the door? I said, your things are in the garage, the code is the same. A pause. That's it, he said. That's all you have to say. I thought about exit 42. I thought about the blank look on his face. I thought about can you hurry up, and a bag set down on gas station pavement, and a natural stopping point, and the way he hadn't called me for 6 days, and the fact that the first contact had come through my brother, which meant he'd calculate that too. Yes, I said. That's all. He called 47 times in the next 2 weeks. I know this because I counted, which I realize sounds strange, but there was something steadying about the number. It made the thing concrete. 47, a specific quantity of too little, too late. His mother called twice. I didn't answer either time. On the 14th day, he sent a text through my brother's phone because I had blocked his number by then. The text said, I made a mistake. Please, we have a baby coming. Think about our baby. I took a screenshot. I sent it to Catherine. She said, good. What happened next took 4 months. I won't make it sound simpler than it was, because it wasn't simple. There were days I cried in the shower until the water went cold. There were nights I lay awake with my hand on my stomach, feeling something flutter and thinking about the specific cruelty of becoming a mother and a single woman at the same time, how no one prepares you for that overlap, how the joy and the grief just live right next to each other in your chest with no dividing wall. There were also days I felt something else, quieter and steadier. A feeling I didn't have a word for at first, but which eventually I recognized as something like solid, like the ground had come up to meet my feet. Catherine was methodical. She filed first. Because I had filed first, certain things became easier. Because the house was in my name, other things became easier still. Because I had documentation, because I had saved the texts, including the one sent through my brother's phone, because my neighbor Dot had seen him try to enter the house that Thursday evening and had, without being asked, written down the date and time in a little notebook she apparently keeps for exactly these sorts of neighborhood developments. The process moved. There was one morning, somewhere in month 3, when Catherine called me and said, I need you to sit down. I sat. She said that during the discovery process, they had found that my husband had opened a savings account 14 months ago that I had no knowledge of. He had been transferring money into it monthly, not enormous amounts, but consistent. For over a year, I sat with that for a long moment. 14 months ago, I had been trying to get pregnant. We had talked about it. We had said we both wanted it. He had said, I remember exactly where we were. We were sitting on the back porch in July. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere. The evening was warm. He had said, I think we're ready. While he was saying that, he had already been moving money. Okay, I said to Catherine. What does this mean for us? It means, she said, quite a bit. My daughter was born in May, 7 pounds 4 ounces. She came out loud and stayed that way, which I chose to take as a good sign. My sister was in the room. My mother drove up from Louisville and cried so hard in the waiting area that a nurse came to check on her. Dot from across the street sent a plant. My husband was not there. We had agreed on this, or rather Catherine and his attorney had agreed on this, which amounts to the same thing. He had visitation rights. We had a schedule, he paid support. These were not the outcomes he had expected, I think, when he drove away from that gas station with his mother in the passenger seat and his hands on the wheel and his face set to that careful blank. I think he had expected me to fall apart. I think his mother had expected me to come back on my hands and knees. I think they had looked at me on the shoulder of that highway and seen someone who could be discarded, someone who would crumble, someone small enough to leave. They miscalculated. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday. I remember because I had a doctor's appointment that afternoon for my daughter's 2-month checkup, and I sat in the pediatrician's waiting room, holding her against my shoulder, her small head warm under my chin, and I read the text from Catherine that said, "It's done," and I just sat there breathing for a minute. The woman next to me had a toddler on her lap who was eating goldfish crackers and dropping approximately half of them on the floor. She caught me looking and smiled, that tired fellow traveler smile that mothers exchange in waiting rooms and grocery store checkout lines and all the places where you end up with a small person who needs things. I smiled back. The house is mine. It was always mine, technically, but now it is mine in every way that can be written on paper. I repainted the kitchen last month, a deep, warm green, the color of something growing. My daughter's room is yellow. My mother-in-law sent a card after the finalization. I don't know what she was expecting from that. I didn't open it. I put it in the recycling bin, and then I took my daughter outside into the backyard, and we sat in the October afternoon, her eyes wide and traveling from cloud to cloud, completely unbothered by the fact that the world was enormous and new, and mostly incomprehensible. She has my husband's forehead and my mother's nose, and her own particular expression of pure, baffled interest in everything she sees. I love her in a way that bypasses language. People ask me sometimes, friends, people at work, my mother after her 3rd glass of wine, whether I think my husband really loved me, whether I think he meant it, the marriage, the 4 years. I don't answer that question, not because I don't have thoughts about it, but because I've realized it's the wrong question. What I know is this. I know that when he drove away from that gas station, he believed he was ending something. He believed he was removing me from the equation. He and his mother had sat together in that car, I imagine, and they had been satisfied with their solution. Neat, clean, a problem resolved. What they didn't account for was what I did next. I sat on a gas station floor and charged my phone and called my sister. I ate saltines and waited. I found a lawyer who had been doing this for 17 years and who spoke to me like I was capable of understanding exactly what was happening because I was. I went home. I changed the locks. I stood on the other side of a door and said 4 words. That's all I said. And then I let the process do what processes do. The house is in my name. My daughter is in her yellow room. The kitchen is green. The divorce is done. And when people ask me what I said through that door, the sentence that made him go quiet, the response that his mother heard about later, and that apparently made her, according to my brother, sit down, I always take a second before I answer. Because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a speech, it wasn't a perfectly crafted line from a movie about women reclaiming their lives, it was just true. What I said was, "This is my house and you are not on the deed." 7 words, that's all it took. After 4 years of making myself smaller, of handing him the navigation and falling asleep in the passenger seat, of sitting at his mother's kitchen table, breathing through my mouth while she made coffee and didn't offer me any. 7 words was all it took to make the whole structure of what he'd believed about our situation collapse. He'd built his plan on a foundation that turned out to be mine. That's the thing about underestimating someone. Eventually, the math catches up. My daughter made a sound in her sleep last night, not crying, just a small conversational noise, like she was working something out. I lay in the dark and listened and thought, I am going to tell her this story someday. Not the painful parts, not the gas station, not the blank look, not the 47 calls, the other part. The part where her mother sat on a floor by a lottery ticket display and made 1 phone call, and then another, and then kept going. That's the part I want her to know.